Good afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm here to tell you about my epic excursion to Kalahari Resort as a birthday present from my friend Teresa. For those of you that don't know what Kalahari is, it is among the top three largest indoor water parks in the United States. Whether it's number one or not is hard to verify as there are conflicting sources, but it's definitely up there, and it was great that I could experience something that's really close to being a Guinness World Record breaking place. One of the biggest things that stood out to me was just how huge the place was. Now, I know that's an understatement when I literally just said that it was one of the largest indoor water parks in the United States, but Kalahari is actually much more than just a water park. It's also a resort and a convention center, and it even has an outdoor water park, though it was way too cold for us to do that because we went at the tail end of April. Kalahari just had so many things to look at. It had tons and tons of places to eat. It had a giant arcade that was so huge that I feel like the pictures that I took just didn't do it justice. Of course, we were there for the water park, so we didn't really pay too much attention to the other attractions, except for the ice cream place when some of the people in our group wanted dessert. So once we actually got into the water park, one of the first things that stood out to me was how open it was. Again, I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot, but despite it being one of the largest indoor water parks in the US, it felt empty. Not in the sense that there weren't enough people. There were tons of people, but it wasn't crowded. It wasn't congested. It was just that they had built enough open space for people to walk through while hardly ever feeling like I had to push my way through the crowds. I really loved how many different rides there were and being surprised to know, like, oh wow, we still haven't even discovered half of them. And while it's true that there were a lot of rides, not all of the place was taken up with water slides. There were quite a lot of chairs and tables, like almost too much. It felt like there were these big spaces that could have been used for water park rides, but instead there were like these gated off areas where people could like pay to have their own private space with some chairs and a TV, which I was like, why would you want to do that? You're at a water park. You can sit down anywhere. Why not actually be in the water? The first thing we went to, because our group had differing opinions of what we wanted to do, was the wave pool. That was the one thing that all six of us wanted to do. It was kind of underwhelming. Like, it was okay, but I was definitely expecting it to be like where you had a boogie board and you would ride that boogie board like you were surfing, but instead we all just kind of stood there and sometimes lifted up our feet a little bit when the big waves would come. The 6 feet part was blocked off, so the deepest we were able to go to was 5 feet. Now, the way a wave pool works is that the measurement warnings are based on how high the waves get, not on how high the default water was. Because the waves would only come in waves. That's terrible. That's a really bad pun. Every couple of minutes, and so after the waves subsided, then it would just be a very shallow pool that people could just walk around in and sit in, which was one thing that was kind of weird about Kalahari. There wasn't really a traditional swimming pool, because even when we went to Splash Village, which was considerably smaller than this, there were areas where people could just swim, like that's what you do at a water park, but it had more than enough great things to make up for it. We went on quite a few slides after that. The first one we went on was kind of like those potato sack slides that you would see at a carnival, but this time we would go on mats in the water. And instead of it being a really simple blink and you miss it type of ride, we went through a tunnel first before sliding down on the outside slides. One of our members didn't show up, and so we were worried that maybe she got stuck on the ride, so the three of us are kind of in panic mode, like, what are we supposed to do? So I think there was an unspoken consensus that we just stood there at the end of the ride just in case she wanted to come see us. I was on the verge of asking Allison to go and check up on her when she finally showed up. We asked what happened, and she said that her knee was starting to hurt, so she didn't want to risk it. We also went on a few what they call toilet bowl slides, which were where you go down this tube part And then you come out in this open area that's shaped like a toilet bowl, where it has like a big hole at the bottom, and then you fall through that into deeper water and then swim to safety. There was one where we rowed together as all four of us in one big tube. Poor Allison just got belted with one of the water sprayers. It went straight in her face, and it was very hard for her to get all that chlorine out of her nostrils. But otherwise, we had a really good time, and there were definitely a few moments where it plunged really deep, and it had just the right amount of scary moments for me to feel like I was back at Cedar Point. The other one was a solo ride. This was a little bit weird because there was a rule about how you had to put your arms behind your head, and the lifeguard wasn't sure if I was allowed to plug my nose or not. So I kind of had to guess when I could open my eyes and realize, okay, I'm not going down the slide anymore. I'm circling around waiting for me to drop into the water. And then once I did get into the water, then I couldn't like open my eyes to see where I was because the water coming from the dome was like draining down. So I had to like blindly swim in what I thought was the direction of the lifeguard, and turns out I was right. And it looked like he was on the verge of trying to reach out his hand and help me, but thankfully I'm actually quite a good swimmer. Even before I got over my aquaphobia, people said I swam like a fish. I just didn't like to be in the water. There was a lazy river, but we didn't spend too much time on it. I think we did like 2 laps altogether before I was kind of tired of it. Two of the members of our group, Alex and Andrew, they went on the lazy river all the time because they didn't want to go on all the scary rides. There were some hot tubs or jacuzzis or spas, whatever you want to call them, where the water was hotter than usual, but it wasn't like overwhelmingly hot like some jacuzzis I'd been in before. However, this was probably the weakest part of the experience for me overall, as the ones we went to were the adults only sections, and they didn't have anywhere to sit except for the steps leading into the pool and some stools where people who had money could pay for drinks at the bar. So a bar within a hot tub. That's such a genius concept. There was also like a partition, or not a partition, but like miniature curtains where you could walk through to go to an outdoor part of the hot tub. It was a bit too cold for us, even with the hot water, so we stayed inside. But because there weren't really any seats that we could sit on, we kind of had to like do wall sits, which was okay, but then the texture at the bottom of the pool was like kind of rocky, so it really hurt our feet after a while. We still managed to go to this a couple of times to pass the time. At one point, the steps were free, so we used that to sit down. There was also another spa at the other side of the park that the other members of our group went to except for me and Allison. So we spent over an hour searching for the other members of our group before they said that they were going to that part of the park, which was the one part we didn't search because I guess we either forgot about it or assumed they'd want to go to the adults only section. I don't know why we didn't think of it. Next to the not adult only spa, there was, well, I guess you could say it was sort of a pool, but it like had basketball hoops so that people could play basketball in the water. Didn't interest me in the slightest. There was a giant tower near the entrance that was basically the kids section, so none of us went to that. Although it did seem like it had the big bucket to splash the kids with, although I never saw it really dump, so they must not have had it working at the time we went to it. Once we got to the other side of the pool, near where the lazy river was, we had to climb up these really tall towers to get to the other slides. One of them involved me and Allison sitting in this big tube that had enough room for us to stretch out our whole legs and slide down. Poor Allison kept facing away from the bottom of the slide, and that would always freak her out. And it would happen every single time, no matter where she sat. It just happened to be that way with gravity. There was another ride where we were on tubes. The rides that were our least favorite were the ones where we had to slide down on our backs and it was really bumpy, like just constant cracks on our back. I enjoyed it enough to go on it twice, and then I just said my back can't take any more of it, and she was thinking exactly the same thing. One ride had such a long line that Allison and I were able to play 2 games of ABC on a subject. So she asked me to name a video game after every letter of the alphabet, And I asked her to name a movie or a TV show after every letter in the alphabet. And since she was struggling a bit with that, she allowed me to chime in. I don't watch too many movies, but I was really surprised by how well I did. And then we still were only halfway through the line, so then we ended up talking about why it's worth it to be Catholic. And so overall, I think Kalahari was an excuse to get a lot of exercise because we only went on most of the rides once or twice. And it felt like we spent so much time searching for the other members of our group that ended up being most of the time we spent at the resort. So our feet were really sore, especially since we were barefooted, and we didn't get too much time to sit on benches or chairs or anything like that. And of course, all the standing around we had to do for the rides and all the walking around because it was such a big place. Very, very tiring event, but a very fun one at the same time. I definitely don't want to give the impression that it was a bad time, just one that gave me a lot of exercise. I think for me, the overall highlight of the entire experience was just the insane amount of relatability. Like, for starters, everyone is in swim clothes, so it felt like a miniature Garden of Eden. But also, like, there were a wide variety of types of people. There were some that looked like they were totally fine in what they were wearing. Then there were some that looked like they hated their swimwear and were really struggling with it. Because I used to think that guys had all the problems with their swim clothes and girls had an absolutely perfect time in the water, but going to Splash Village and Kalahari made me realize that they have just as many struggles. They're just, I guess they don't talk about it as much, or they don't put themselves in a position where people would notice. So I don't want to say that I was happy seeing them struggle, but it helped me feel like guys and girls are really not as different as I used to think that they were in my childhood and some of my teenage years. Overall, I think Kalahari was definitely worthy of being one of the highlights of my year. The rides were much longer than the ones at Splash Village. Despite how I said that the walking around was really sore on our feet, it was also really great to get that good exercise. Allison was my ride partner the whole time, so that was the most time we had ever spent with each other consecutively. And it was really nice that after the mission trip, we were able to have more than just a couple of hours of a hangout. We took a lot of good group pictures. The food was not that great, but at least we had food. And the bathrooms were disgusting. But despite all of my complaints, I think that Kalahari gets my rating of probably a 9 out of 10. I don't really like to do ratings that much, but seeing as this is a water park and I don't go to those that much, I think I'm worth making the exception. The only thing that I would say to improve on Kalahari is fix that one slide that has a lot of cracks from all the connecting pieces, because my gosh, both Allison and I had really sore backs after that. So with that, thank you very much for watching. I hope you really enjoyed the pictures that I took and hearing about my experiences. Special thanks to my patrons Matthew Rakowski, Sploon Ghost, Splatcat, and Scooter Doodle for their support on Patreon. I don't know how to express how grateful I am to them. And until the next time, remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye!